I wanted to start with an exercise that everyone can participate in. Just breathing in and breathing out. Do you feel it? That's the power of Jesus. Please turn to 2 Corinthians 13:4. I just wanted to share what I was going through and what God kind of spoke to me about. And it's a bit about weakness. And I think everyone can relate with this because we're all weak. This morning I woke up 4 in the morning like usual. Pastor Carl wakes up at 2, but I meet him at 4 o'clock. And I asked God to wake me up at 4 in the morning because I knew that I needed to prepare for this. But I felt a little bit weak reading. I couldn't really think of something. But then I laid down and meditated on God's faithfulness for a bit and did a little bit of that, just breathing in and out. And I just said, like, God, your grace is sufficient for me. And then I had a light bulb moment and I went to that verse. And I realized that, like Paul, we can all go through moments of weaknesses, but that's not something Christ is not familiar with himself. We can see in this verse, 2 Corinthians 13:4, Paul is talking about the Corinthians, and he's excited to meet them for, it looks like, the 3rd time. And he says, he addresses that they've been sinning, but that's not the end of it. He says that he comes to encourage them. And in verse 4 of chapter 13, he says, "For though he was crucified through weakness, yet he lived by the power of God. For we also are weak in him, but we shall live with him by the power of God toward you." I thought that was amazing. Like, wow, God's power is toward me today. In my own weakness, which I can't help it, we're all weak. But we're weak in him. And that changes everything because he has crucified the power of the flesh. And that weakness that once hindered me from seeing God is the very weakness that Jesus took for me. And now he lives by the power of God. And today God's saying his power is toward you. It's not away from you, but it's toward you. He says, verse 9 of chapter 12, "His grace is sufficient for you. It's enough for today, and not too little, not too much, but it's just enough so that you could go in your weakness and share the love of Christ with people."
That's good.
He says that even though we are weak, his power is enough that is facing toward you to carry you through to the next thing. He's not expecting you to get there all through the same strength. He knows that this power that's toward you right now is enough to get you to the next thing. And then that thing will get you to the next thing.
Beautiful.
And then at the end, we're facing toward him.
That's
right
good.
before him.
Good job. Good word.
And so that's amazing that God would be facing toward us. Like, that had to take the Son of God to take that sin away so that his face would be facing toward us and we could be facing him.
Yeah. Amen.
And so it's amazing because his word power, it's in Greek, it's dynamite.
Blow you up.
Yeah. So take our message, Pastor Carl. It says this dynamite power
That's so good.
will light you up for the next thing.
Amen.
And he will light your soul up. I said God's dynamite power is dynamic power because it will change and transform you. And his resurrection power, the same power that rose Christ from the dead, will raise us up at the end.
Yes.
And his inherent power, this power does not come from the world. The world has its own power,
Right.
but it's its willpower.
Wow.
Willpower will run out.
Wow.
And you will see it run out.
Yeah.
But God's power does not run out because it comes from his own nature.
Amen.
So I'll say God's power blows things up. His power lifts me up. And his power will cast down the enemy.
Yeah.
He blows things up. He blows himself up. He shows it on the screen. He just makes himself bigger. And we're in him, so we'll be made big with him.
Wow.
And then at the same time, while he's making himself bigger, it's lifting us up. And then the enemy is already cast down because his power has already taken up the power of the flesh.
Mm.
And so, that's funny, I said, this is not horsepower, this is not firepower, this is God's power. And it's just an amazing thing to meditate on when we're in weakness, because we're still in our sin nature, but God's power is still facing toward you. And it's always facing toward you. It can't not face toward you. So I just wanted to encourage everyone with that word, that God's power is toward you today.
Amen. Amen. Good job. Amen. Good job, brother.
Find stuff.
Great work.